So I just got back from PAX, took home some big wins. We're going to be going over my tournament winning deck profile.
If you're a fan of the channel, consider supporting me on Patreon. For as little as $1 per month, you can help me continue to bring you premier, unmatched content. Unlock exclusive rewards by becoming a patron today.
What's up guys, Zero Skater here, and I did just get back from PAX Unplugged over the weekend where I had a blast meeting up with the Unmatched crew as always, and got to meet some new faces over at the Gudnak crew as well. So big shout out to Tim and Ian, you guys are awesome, your game is awesome, and it was nice to meet you in person. So that was really cool. I played in tons of events throughout the weekend, played some Unmatched, won a Golden Moon Knight mini for that one, which was really cool. I ended up taking down a Disney Villainous tournament that I randomly walked up to. So that was really cool. I got like a golden trophy for that one that holds like the power tokens for that game. So that was pretty sweet. And then Friday night, this was immediately after I won the Villainous tourney actually. I had to hurry up and rush over to the Gudnak area because me and Chad played in a 2v2 Gudnak tournament, and we took that one down together, so that was really cool. I played a Gloaming Everking deck, and he played a Refractory Bullgriff Rider deck. So the synergy was awesome there, and we played really well, and we took home the win. So really cool, becoming the 2024 Gudnak 2v2 World Champions. So that was sweet. And then Saturday, there was the 1v1 Gudnak tournament, and I ended up taking that one down as well with my Gloaming Malevolent Presence deck. So we're going to be doing something a little different today. We're going to do a deck profile for that deck that I won the tournament with, and go over all the cards and some of the sweet combos that you can do with the deck. So before we get into it, as always guys, be sure to attack that like button if you enjoy the video, and subscribe for more Zero Skater content. And I hope you all are excited for this because I know I sure am. This deck has been the one that I've really played the most of ever since I started Gudnak. It's really the only deck I've really put a lot of time into as of yet. And it's just my favorite. It's really cool. There's tons of cool things you can do. So let's not wait any longer. We will get on into the Gloaming Malevolent Presence deck.
Alright, so here we are on the official Gudnak website. I just wanted to show you all the site real quick before we jump into the profile. So this is the homepage it'll take you to. They got this cool animation here. You can learn all about what is Gudnak. You can find this video right here, learn how to play. It's only like a 7-minute video. It'll teach you all the basics that you need to get started for yourselves playing this awesome game. So go check that out. You can check out all the different factions of the game. So the core set has the Refractory, the Sworn Alliance, the Gloaming, and the Dalguan, and learn a little bit about their backstories. And there's just incredible art everywhere in this game, so that is pretty sweet. If you look up at the top, you can go ahead and purchase it for yourself over on Team Covenant's website. Join the Discord, of course, if you're not already a part of that. And then you can check out all the different factions here and look into the comic as well. So let's just take a quick look at the Gloaming because it's a Gloaming deck profile. So it says we must preserve tradition even from beyond the grave. So the Everking sits upon the throne of the snow-covered north, having finally won the war he once lost. Surrounded by powerful forces of the undead, the Gloaming seek revenge on all of the living. The Gloaming primarily use their seemingly endless army to outlast their foes, but manipulation and trickery come naturally to their heroes, who can infiltrate an army undetected until they are ready to strike. So that definitely sounds like my deck right there with Malevolent Presence. So this is just really cool to check all this out. So go take a look at the official Gudnak website. But if we come over here to play, you can see the deck builder. That's where we're going to go to see the deck profile. So let's click the deck builder. Check this out. This is the home page you'll drop into. It's always got a featured card of the day and a deck of the day. If you look over on the side here, you can just take a look through all of the cards. You can search and filter everything. You can take a look at different decks. You can log in to create your own decks, and you can make decks private or public. So if you're just testing maybe for tournament or something and you don't want to give away your secrets, you can make it private. And there's all kinds of helpful tools here. So let's take a look at my decks. I only have a couple, but we're going to take a look at my Gloaming deck right here. So I called it Big Boo's Haunt. If any of you have played Super Mario 64, you might get the reference. Great game, just like Gudnak. But there's a little description I wrote up for the deck if you want to read that on your own time. But let's take a look at the cards in the deck. So when you're building a Gudnak deck, of course, you have 20 cards consisting of 5 heroes, 5 tactics, and 10 basics. Okay, that's always the same deck makeup regardless of what faction you pick. But of course, you get to modify all of those cards within those parameters. So the big bad hero 3 of my deck, the main guy here is Malevolent Presence. So it's a hero 3, and it's got a continuous ability called Habitation. You may deploy or move this fighter underneath any other fighter. And now that includes friendly or enemy fighters, which is incredibly good. There's tons of sneaky plays you can do with Malevolent Presence. So if you put it underneath an enemy fighter in their gates, let's say, and then that enemy fighter on the top of that stack, that newly created stack, is destroyed or removed, then Malevolent Presence is sieging your opponent instantly. So there's some cool plays you can do there. And keep in mind that anything that is uncovered from beneath a stack comes in ready, essentially. So if you slip Malevolent Presence underneath an opponent's guy and then you kill that top fighter, then Malevolent Presence is instantly ready to strike something who was adjacent. So again, we'll go over some cool plays you can do with the deck when we get through the cards, but let's move on to the next one. So Dominating Wraith is a hero 2 ability. It's a deploy ability. That's what this little symbol means here with the arrow coming down. And you can deploy this fighter on top of any fighter that isn't in an opponent's gates, regardless of owner, trait, or position. So you just pop this guy on top of any fighter, creates an instant stack. It's really, really good. And if you do it on top of an opponent's fighter, you essentially hijacked their stack or that fighter, and they will not get control of that back until they destroy the Wraith. So this is a pseudo removal in a way. If you're in the late game, they may not have great ways to get rid of the Wraith, and so you can kind of just remove an enemy fighter by just popping the Wraith on top, and that's really good. It also has a second ability called Relinquish. It's an activate ability. That's the one with the little plus inside of it. And you can move this fighter without the rest of its stack. So normally a stack, when you move, they all move together. But Relinquish just lets you move the Wraith off the top, and everything else stays in place where it was. Now that's really good because if you steal an opponent's hero 3, let's say, and then you move it into your own gates, and then on a following turn you can relinquish to move the Wraith off, and then defend action against that hero 3 that you now put into your gates. So you can just discard some basic 1s and kill off a hero 3 permanently in that case, right? You went on top, you stole it, you moved it over, and then you move off and defend against it. That's a really good play you can do with Wraith. But this card is just really versatile. It's an incredible, incredible card. So next one is Low Country Assassin. So it is a hero 2. It is also a hunter, if that matters for anything. Sometimes it does for stacking, but you can use its lurker deployment ability to deploy this fighter underneath any enemy fighter. So very similar to Malevolent Presence, except Low Country Assassin can only deploy underneath enemy fighters, whereas Malevolent Presence can do it to any fighter. And also this is only on deploy. Malevolent Presence could continue repeating its ability to slide underneath something multiple times because Malevolent Presence is continuous, where this is just deploy. But it also has this sneak attack ability, which says if this fighter started the turn in an enemy stack, it has +1 when attacking. And that is a little typo here, I just noticed, because it's only +1 when attacking heroes specifically. And that is an important point to note. So, you know, if you uncover the assassin, he can trade up into your opponent's hero 3, which is really, really strong. So we'll get into some more combos with this guy in a bit, but very similar to Malevolent Presence, and this guy is a neutral card. If you look at the symbol down in the bottom right here, that's neutral, so any deck could technically play Assassin, but I believe this is the best home for the Assassin. So the next card, a hero 1, we're going to see Veiled Queen. So it has an activate ability called Power Behind the Throne, and you say target opponent must use their next action to move if possible. This is incredibly strong because it forces a move from your opponent as their first action on their next turn when they might have wanted to do something else. So it's incredibly disruptive. If you know the opponent is running 2-cost tactics like Memento Mori or Fratricide or Earthquake, if you activate Queen, you know they're not going to be able to play those tactics because their first action is a forced move, so then they only have one action remaining. So you can shut off some powerful tactics from your opponent with this card. You can force them into unfavorable board positions by making it so their only possible move is like one single fighter in particular, and you can kind of force that fighter into you so that you can get a value trade, so that can be really strong. You can maybe, if they only have one fighter blocking their gates, you can force them to move off of their gates, so now that you can go in for a siege. Queen has a million possibilities, and it's just really, really powerful at disrupting your opponent, and timing when to use this ability is really going to make or break this card, because if you deploy Queen too early and they wanted to use move actions anyways, then you're really just sacrificing your own action economy, and the opponent doesn't even mind. So you really got to find those windows of opportunity with Queen, but if you can, it's going to be an incredibly powerful card. Moving on, we're going to see the Wanderer. Now, this guy is also a neutral, similar to the Assassin that we saw. So any deck could play this, but again, I believe this is the best deck to play Wanderer in because his ability is unsettling. So this fighter cannot be attacked by fighters in stacks, and that's a continuous ability. So if you are afraid of Wanderer being attacked by somebody, like let's say you deploy Wanderer in your gates and you want to protect your gates really well, the opponent marches up with a 3-power fighter, you can slide your Malevolent Presence or Assassin underneath that fighter that is approaching you. Now all of a sudden it's a stack when it wasn't previously, and now they can't attack the Wanderer, so he's like a roadblock. And then the other ability is Uninvited, which is an activate ability, and you move this fighter to any unoccupied square adjacent to an enemy stack. So if your opponent leaves their gates open, then you can, again, slide Malevolent Presence under their fighter and then Uninvited to warp into the gates from across the board with Wanderer. So really, Wanderer is very similar to Elven Druid. If you're familiar with that card, it's a Shardsworn Hero 1 that has a Bear form, Owl form, 2 activate abilities, one of which makes it a 3 until your next turn, which basically your opponent doesn't want to attack into it because it's buffed up to a 3. And then the second Owl form lets you just go to any empty space on the board. And that is just like this Uninvited ability, basically. So it's kind of your discount Elven Druid, but for Gloaming, who doesn't have access to an Elven Druid, that is just incredibly strong. So Wanderer is crazy in this deck. All right, so let's move on to the tactics. The first one we're going to see is Fratricide. This is a classic for any Malevolent Presence deck. It costs 2 actions here to play, so it's going to take your whole turn, but you destroy the lowest power fighter in a target stack, and if it's a tie, you choose which fighter to destroy. So the basic play is you put Malevolent Presence underneath an opponent's 3, and then on the following turn, you go ahead and Fratricide to kill off their 3, and you basically just spent one single tactic to kill off a hero 3, and that is just incredibly strong. So Fratricide is crazy. Now there is counterplay, of course, because the opponent could stack more fighters on top after you put the Malevolent Presence underneath, and what that's going to do is force out the Fratricide to kill not the 3, but the weaker fighter that was stacked on top. So then you're going to have to do some work to maybe chip away at that stack, trying to remove those topmost fighters that are lower level so that you can destroy the 3-power fighter, that you initially intended. And sometimes that can be a problem too, because your Malevolent Presence can get kind of trapped underneath a big stack of opposing fighters, and that you really don't want to let that happen. So time your Fratricides properly, and this can be an incredibly powerful card. Moving on, we're going to see Mysterious Mists, another MVP of the deck. It's just a 1-cost tactic. You choose an enemy stack, relocate the topmost fighter to an adjacent unoccupied square. So this is insane. It can create some surprise siege win conditions in the endgame. So you just wait till your opponent is empty deck, and if they have one single fighter on their gates, you slide Malevolent Presence or Low Country Assassin underneath, and then on your second action you Mysterious Mists, because now you've created an enemy stack. You move the topmost fighter to the side, and surprise, you got the siege with your fighter that you slipped underneath. So The MP Mists is a incredibly powerful win condition in the endgame, and something that your opponents are really going to have to play around. This can also be great for, let's say they put down a basic 1 and then a basic 3, because they want to then advance with their 3 and then maybe attack and trade with another 3 in the gates to then relocate their 1 into the gates for a siege. And that's kind of a common play. So if people do that, you got to be careful, because you can pull that 3 off the top of the stack and then maybe get a trade up with one of your 2s, or even trade over the top with one of your 3s for free. So Mists can be a great value tool in that regard by trading up, and it can also be a win condition in the end game by getting that surprise siege. So it's a really versatile card and really makes your opponent think twice about stacking their fighters. Moving on, we're going to see Persuasion. Now, a lot of people that I've talked to aren't a huge fan of this card, but I've always really enjoyed this card anytime I've played this deck. What it does is you reveal target opponent's hand, and you choose a fighter, and that opponent must use their next action to deploy that fighter if possible. So very similar to Veiled Queen, where you're forcing your opponent's next action to be something in particular that you want it to be. You're going to force them to deploy the fighter of your choosing when they revealed their hand upon activation of this card. So that, first of all, just forcing the action to be a deploy can be really helpful. Like I mentioned before with 2-cost tactics, they wouldn't be able to play those 2-cost tactics at least that turn because they have to deploy. It also is good for pulling out certain fighters that you know have great deploy abilities, or just certain abilities that maybe now is not the right time for your opponent to use them. So if you can pull that fighter out and then destroy it before it has a chance to use its ability well, then you're in a great spot. So some examples of that would be Shard Dragon, right? Shard Dragon wants to blow things up at an opportune moment, and if you can just pull out that Shard Dragon early before it has a chance to use its lay waste ability, and then just trade off with it, and now you don't have to worry about it the rest of the game. That's really good. You can also Persuasion out something like a Battle Master who gets a tactic back from the graveyard from Refractory. So if they don't have any tactics yet, you make them waste their Battle Master. That's a big win, in my opinion. And a key play that I actually did in the 1v1 finals to win that was my opponent was playing Vigilant Sentry in their Everking deck, which is an amazing, incredible tech, by the way. So shout out to Pause for making such a cool deck. That was genius. But what Sentry does is when you would be sieged, you can sacrifice him from your hand or board to consider yourself not sieged that turn. So it really buys you an extra turn when you would normally lose the game. And that's huge in an Everking deck because you can get your Memento Mori off, which is a 2-cost tactic that is really slow, and oftentimes you won't have a chance to use it to get back an extra fighter from the grave. But if you can get back your Everking with Memento Mori, it's often game-winning. So what I did was Persuasion, once they had an empty deck and I knew they were going to go for the Memento Mori play, I forced out the Vigilant Sentry onto the board, and then I killed it off before going in for the siege. So that was absolutely game-winning. So Persuasion, you can find certain fighters to try to pull out of your opponent's hand at a time that they wouldn't want that fighter to be on the board, and you can really win games because of it. So I will say Persuasion is somewhat of a gamble, because if you're going for a certain specific fighter that you want to rip out of their hand, and they don't happen to have that fighter in hand, when you play the Persuasion, well, it might kind of fizzle out. Like, you might not get much value out of this card. So it is a little bit high risk, high reward, but I don't know. Again, just forcing an action from your opponent when they don't want to do that action is just incredible. So I love Persuasion personally. Try it out for yourselves. Next card is going to be Cannon Shot. This one is a neutral, so any deck can play this, and all it does is destroy a target enemy soldier or brute, 1 or 2, in the target opponent's back row. So it can be the gates, it doesn't matter, just as long as it's in the back row, it's a soldier or a brute, and it's a 1 or a 2, you can destroy it with Cannon Shot. So it's just a simple yet very effective removal tool. I love this card in Gloaming in particular because Gloaming is not very fast, so it's harder for them to push into the middle row to threaten your opponent's fighters that are deployed. So Cannon Shot can help you get that kind of removal from across the board. so to speak. So this is really good against things like Forge Father. Forge Father is the #1 target, I think, for Cannon Shot, and that is why I personally chose to run it, because I expected to see a lot of Forge Father, and having a quick, easy removal for that is fantastic. But there are other great targets, things like Luminous Shieldsman or Deep Rock Delver, or I don't know what else is a really good one. You can't hit Elven Druid, unfortunately. So there are things that you cannot hit with Cannon Shot. Can't hit Druid, can't hit Reverend. So in those cases, it feels kind of bad because the thing is with Cannon Shot, if you have a particular target in mind, you probably want to be holding Cannon Shot for that target to show up. And there might be other opportunities for you to use a Cannon Shot, just even on a basic fighter, that would put you in a good spot. But if you're too greedy and you choose to hold the Cannon Shot for a particular unit, A, you might not ever end up even seeing that unit, and B, when that unit does show up, there might be other pressing matters that like you have to attend to first. Like maybe you're being threatened with a really big siege, like a siege with a multi-fighter stack that you can't let happen, or you really need to deploy X unit or use Y effect, right? Like if you might not get a good chance to use it on the particular fighter that you have in mind. So sometimes being too greedy with the Cannon Shot can actually screw you over. So I don't know. You got to pick your moments because again, you can only use Cannon Shot on the back row. So yeah, keep that in mind. But as long as you play with this card well, I think, and you have, you're not too greedy with it, I think it's an incredible removal tool. And any deck can play it, which is really nice. And let's look at the last tactic in the deck. Is going to be Confusion. This one, I was debating whether or not to play Confusion or Conversion. They are both kind of similar purpose cards. They both are a form of removal for typically ones. But I went with Confusion because it allows for 2 actions to be done in the same turn, so you can do something alongside the Confusion, where the Conversion is a higher upside because it's a more powerful effect, but it also costs your whole turn. So with Confusion, you target an enemy 1, and that fighter attacks an adjacent 1 or 2. And now that fighter could attack into one of your own fighters or an opponent's fighter. That is irrelevant as long as it's a 1 or a 2. And so this is great removal for annoying things like the Elven Druid or like the Underchurch Reverend, like I mentioned before. So if they deploy Reverend in their back row, you can deploy a fighter lined up with it in your back row, and then on the following turn you can move your fighter forward, and then Confusion to have force the Reverend to attack into your fighter that you moved up adjacent to it. So that's really good. Also, your opponent has to really be careful around Confusion because they don't want to lose 2 units for the cost of 1 tactic. So they got to be really careful with their positioning to play around it. And also, it is another form of removal. So the reason why I play so much removal like the Confusion and the Cannon Shot and the Mysterious Mists is because they all kind of serve the same purpose, in which you can put your Malevolent Presence underneath a fighter in your opponent's gates or the Assassin. Both work. And then you can play your removal tool as your second action, whether it be the Mists to pop the top fighter off, or the Confusion to have that fighter suicide, or the Cannon Shot to simply straight up destroy that fighter, all of which are going to instantly uncover the fighter that you put underneath theirs, and you're going to get an instant siege. And that can be really good for just straight up winning the game in the end game, but you can also do that throughout the mid game to put pressure on your opponent, because when you get a siege, you're going to mill a card, which if they lose a really important card like a 3 fighter or a really strong tactic, that could be game winning. And not only that, but they have to spend cards to discard to defend against your fighter, most likely. And they also are losing tempo because they had to use one of their actions to defend, to remove your fighter. So plenty of benefits to sieging, even in the middle of the game. And all of these removal options that I run all help me accomplish that when I need to. So those are going to be the tactics. As far as the basics go, I chose to do a 4-4-2 setup, which a 4-4-2 was popularized or created, at least I know of, by Spee. And Spee did this. I'm a big fan. And what it means is you're going to pick a 3, a 2, and 2 1s of one type, or trait, I should say. You're going to pick a 3, a 2, and 2 1s of another trait. and then the 2/2s you're going to have of the third trait. And so what I did was 3 soldier, 2 soldier, 1/1 soldier, and then brute 3/2, 1/1, and then 2 level 2 hunters. And so this gives me a good spread to be able to trade up into any trait. And then it gives you a little bit of stacking capability as well. And another popular lineup you can do for the basics is a 5x5, which I believe was popularized or created by Wandering Caretaker. And these guys are like really early playtesters, and they really helped push a lot of the like early meta development for the game. And so I really like both of these makeups for the basics. But what Wandering Caretaker suggested with the 5x5 is you just pick 3, 2, 2, 1, 1 for 2 different traits, and you neglect the third trait completely. And what that does is gives you maximum stacking capabilities because you're likely to match up the traits more often. But the 4-4-2 in Gloaming, at least, I don't care too much about stacking my own fighters. That's not a focus of my deck. I more so just want to have all the removal options available to handle anything I might go up against. And the reason I chose specifically Soldier and Brute was because at PAX I expected to go up against Refractory being one of my harder matchups that I've practiced. And so Refractory tends to have a lot of soldiers because Dawnsteel Paladin and a lot of their units are soldier type as well as heroes. And so I wanted the big brutes to be able to trade over their soldiers, and then the soldiers to also go even with their soldiers. I didn't want the hunters because then I have to worry about, running into a trait disadvantage if I'm trying to push up and get up in their face to trade off with their soldiers. So that's why I went with the brutes and soldier focus. And then I had just the 2 level 2 hunters for Delguan. So Delguan typically runs a lot of brutes because they have some brute synergies, and Forgefather himself is a brute. So I wanted to make sure to have the 2 level 2 hunters so I could either trade up or trade even, I should say, with a buffed Forgefather, or hit over the top of a non-buffed Forgefather with the 2 hunters. So the basics you can kind of mix and match to your liking. This was just what I ended up going with in anticipation of what I would see at PAX. And yeah, it really just depends on your deck makeup and what you're expecting to run into. But that's what I chose to go for with the basics, and that'll be the deck. Those are all the 20 cards. So before we end the video, I do want to just go over a few of the cool plays you can do. So I'm going to jump on over to Vorpal board, and I'll kind of mock some setup board states and show off some of the cool plays available to this deck. All right, so let's say you find yourself in this position at the opening of the game. So your opponent goes first. They put down a basic 3 fighter, in this case a Deep Rock Soldier 3 because you're up against Delguan, and it's your turn. So what you can do is if you put Malevolent Presence underneath here like this, because you can deploy it underneath with its habitation ability, and then you put down a level 3 fighter of your own, in this case a level 3 brute, that would kill over the top of the soldier because it has the trait advantage. Now it's your opponent's turn. So what are they going to do here? Well, if they do anything that doesn't involve this stack, then on your next turn you could just fratricide, killing off their 3 fighter, and you got a great value out of your fratricide. Right? And that's what the basic play is. And so, of course, the opponent is trying to play around that. So what are their options? Well, they could try to deploy another fighter on top like this, in which case you can simply advance your fighter, and then now you're in a position where if they want to, they could double trade. They could trade off their 2 and then trade off the 3 right there with their 2 actions to avoid, your 3 killing over the top of theirs. But if they don't do that, and they just sit this here, well, on your turn, you could kill their 2, and then they could then take the trade with the 3. Both cases are going to leave your Malevolent Presence in a siege position. So if you are the one who does the trading here, then it leaves you open to a trade here, and then a defend against the Malevolent Presence. But as long as you don't be the one to hit into this, now you just have this 3 sitting there, so that what is the opponent going to do? If they want to back off to the side, they probably don't want to do that because A, that's a loss of tempo, and B, you get to just march right up here if you want to. And Otherwise, if they want to deploy something new here, you're immediately threatening to kill whatever it is, right? If they want to deploy their hero 3, you'll happily take that trade. Or if it's even like a hunter which beats the brute, okay, again, you just take the trade, right? So you're not really worried about them moving to the side and then deploying. So it kind of just locks this stack into place. And then what you could even do then is you could use mists to pull this fighter off to the side and then make your attack and kill off the soldier. And then now you have MP, which is sieging them for 3. And then even if they defend against that, if they don't immediately put down another 3 here, then your brute gets to walk in and siege them as well. And if you get a double siege with three value fighters, you're probably just winning that game. So like those are a number of different scenarios. If they just put down their 3 and you just open up with MP underneath, you are in a really good position here. Because the other thing is if they ignore this stack, you could always just mists the Deep Rock Soldier over here to the front or to the middle and then kill over the top there just like that. And again, you're in that double siege position with the 3s, and that is really dang good, right? So really, really threatening here if you can open up with a play like that. If they just put down their 3 and you can open up with an MP and then 3 of favored trait. I know it's not like super likely, but these are just a few of the avenues that you can find yourself in with Malevolent Presence or with Mysterious Mists, right? Let's say this wasn't a 3 and it was a 2. Well, still, even then, you're threatening to mists their 3 off, and then your 2 gets to trade up into their 3 and they would both die. But you're fine with that because the mists in that case let you trade up. And that is exactly what you want a tactic to do. That's why people run things like Ultimate Sacrifice for Dalguan, or Ambush typically for Shardsworn, or Reposition for Refractory, right? They're those tactics that sneakily let you trade up one of your 2s into your opponent's 3. That's great value. So you can use this as value just like that. And let's say even if you didn't have the Malevolent Presence, and they do their 3 like this, and you put down Assassin underneath, well, again, they can't approach with the soldier because then it just dies to the brute. So on their turn, if they stack something else on top of it, they probably wouldn't do that because now you're not threatening the fratricide like the Malevolent Presence does. So they probably don't feel the need to put something stacked on top. So maybe they just deploy to the sides or do whatever else, take some draw. And then again, you can still, with the Assassin, do the Mists play, pull it off, kill over the top, and then now you are sieging them with a 2, which is still pretty respectable, and they have to defend against it. And then again, if they don't deploy immediately to the gates with the 3, then you can just march your 3 in there and siege them once again. So still really, really powerful opener to have either MP or Assassin. Either of those, and then the favored trait puts them in a really threatening position because they don't know which of these plays you're going to do, right? Depending on which of these 2 you have, and whether or not you have the Fratricide or the Mysterious Mists, they really just don't know exactly what you have. And if they just decide to stack, once again, you could pull this up. And then even on your following turn, if they kept this here, you could do like a first action cannon shot to blow up this, and then a second action kill over the top there, and then get that siege. And yeah, all just really, really good openers. So those are some of the cool things you can do with these types of cards in your opening hand. All right, so let's talk about endgame scenarios. Let's say you find yourself in a position such as this, and it's your turn. You each have, let's say, 1 card left in deck, something like that, and you have a lot of options here. So what you could do is, let's say, use Veiled Queen. So that means that your opponent must move as their next action, and then if you were to move up here, let's say, well, then they're going to draw their last card, and their first action has to be a move. And this is a cool thing with Queen because they only have 1 option to move, so they have to move this brute down. Now, what can they do from here? Well, not a whole lot, right? They can deploy a guy here. Let's say it was a Soldier 3. Now, if they do that, that's probably their best option because anything else will result in an instant win from you. Because, of course, if they leave the gates open, you just march in. If they move one of their guys down, well, then you just put Malevolent Presence or Assassin underneath, and then you do Mysterious Mists to relocate this topmost fighter, and then boom, you got the siege and you win. Right? So they can't just have a single fighter in the gates, so they're not just able to move this down. So what they have to do is they only have one more action, remember, because you made them move. So they have to deploy one of their units here that isn't just going to die to the one brute that is in front of them. So if they do that, well, they stopped it for this turn. But let's say then you can kill off your brute on purpose, and then let's say slide the assassin underneath. Okay, now it's back over to their turn. Now what are they going to do? Well, they probably feel threatened by the Mists combo, so what they could do is stack an additional fighter on top of here so that you're not able to pull off their only fighter. They could also, well, they can't move up here because your Wanderer will then just fly in there, so they can't leave that open. And so they probably want to stack a second fighter. Okay, now it's getting kind of annoying because you can't just Mists and pull off their thing. But if you are able to kill off the rest of their board, because in the end game, right, there's not a whole lot of fighters left. So if you're able to clean up a couple of fighters, sometimes you can force Queen to make them move away with their stack, and then you're able to wander into the gates, which is really good. Additionally, if you can even just force them to move their stack, if you have something like a Dominating Wraith, well, this guy can capture the stack, and again, in the end game, that can be super, super powerful by just capturing the stack, and now all of a sudden, well, they probably just don't have fighters left to really defend themselves. So there's some tricky scenarios here in the end game, but now, even if it's a little bit simpler, let's say, of a board state, let's say you don't have Queen, I don't know, you don't have so much stuff, you just have a Wanderer, and they have a dude, and they know that the Mists, Assassin Mists combo is coming up, so they're like, well, I don't want to leave a single dude in my gates, so let me just keep the gates empty, right? And then what? Well, Wanderer can teleport adjacent to any enemy stack. And so again, you can just put the Assassin or the Malevolent Presence underneath. Now it's created a stack, and then you can just warp Wanderer into the gates. So if you have Wanderer on board and Mists and Assassin in hand, you create some incredibly threatening endgame board states that you can just surprise siege them for a win out of nowhere in a single turn. So your opponent has to play around that really carefully, and oftentimes the best way for them to do that is by stacking up multiple fighters on top of their fighter to prevent the Mists. But then they run the risk of, as soon as that fighter leaves the gates, then you can just Wraith to capture the entire stack. And so that forces them to keep the stack here, but that's multiple cards that they've used, right, to create the stack. B, they have to have other guys on the board to spend the actions, because when it gets down to the end game and you are forced to take 2 actions, sometimes you might have to do move actions that you don't want to do necessarily. So they have to have other dudes, and then if you can just deal with the other dudes, eventually they're going to be forced to move the stack, and then Wanderer just gets to fly in for the win. So Wanderer is incredibly threatening in the end game and can even work great, you know, if they just already had a stack of whatever and they try to approach your gates because it's getting towards endgame. And if you just park Wanderer in your gates, well, you can defend really well against those stacks. So yeah, a lot of sneaky endgame win conditions with this deck. All right, so a couple of other things I want to note here. If your opponent opens up with, they go first and they deploy a brute or a soldier 1 or 2 to their back row gates like this, a cool little thing you can do because of Cannon Shot, like I mentioned before, it just gets to kill things from across the board. And typically, I mean, yeah, that's a good effect, but it's especially good here because, again, you could just put your Assassin underneath and then instantly Cannon Shot to kill off their dude, and they are instantly in a siege position with a 2. And in this case, you don't get the assassin to trade up into an enemy fighter, but you're not losing one of your precious threes, and you still get an instant siege. So it's almost like Cannon Shot just traded 1 for 1 like it typically does, but the assassin got to deploy into your opponent's gates instantly. And that is really strong. It creates a large tempo swing in your favor because then they're going to mill a random card. Hopefully it's something good. Even if it's not, they got to ditch 2 more cards to defend because they have no other board. And then, so they didn't get to draw for turn. They had to pitch 2 cards, and now they only have 1 more action to deploy one of their few remaining cards in hand, probably to their gates, and you just play from there. So you got like a 3-for-1 off of the assassin instantly turn 1. So that is incredibly powerful. So I did just want to point out that cool opening play as well, because with Assassin doing that, you don't even feel bad because you can still do your Mists win condition in the end with the Malevolent Presence. And you can even do the Fratricide with the Malevolent Presence and then do the Mists thing, because Malevolent Presence isn't simply a deploy effect like the Assassin. You can do it while it's already on the board. So you can slip it under on deploy, do the Fratricide, get your value there, and then later on, as long as you're keeping Malevolent Presence alive, then you could slide him underneath once again in the end game, and then Mists off for the win. So using your Assassin in this manner at the beginning of the game is incredibly strong. Another thing is just in general to avoid Fratricide, your opponent probably wants to stack more fighters on top of the one that's being threatened by the Fratricide with the Malevolent Presence underneath. And that can sometimes work out okay for you, actually, because if you can't get out your Malevolent Presence from underneath an enemy stack, it feels really bad because you essentially wasted one of your hero 3s, and that's horrible. It can be game losing. But it's probably underneath a 3 of theirs, and then if they stack something additionally on top of that, well, eventually you can just capture the big stack with a Wraith, and that kind of recoups that loss of value, because now your opponent wasted fighters that they won't be getting back unless they can kill the Wraith. And if they do kill the Wraith, and then you're able to chip off that top fighter that they covered, and then eventually maybe pull off the Fratricide, there's just a lot of dynamics there between the stacking that both players have to keep in mind, because recklessly just putting a Malevolent Presence under your opponent's fighter and then just losing it the entire game because you never get it back, it will lose you the game. So just be careful, but lots of cool dynamics, and Wraith is incredible in that regard. And then something cool with like Persuasion is it works well with Confusion, right? Because if your opponent has a really good hero 1, let's say, that you want to get rid of, well, you could, even on an empty board, you could do like a first action Persuasion, and then let's say this is your opponent's hand, you see Faithful Servant, who can be really threatening. Let's say you are going to force them to deploy Servant, and then you do whatever else action, it doesn't matter, and then on their turn they're forced to deploy the Servant, and in the case that they had any other fighters pre-existing in their back row, like let's say like this, well, then you can on your turn just do the Confusion to force the Faithful Servant to kill itself off into one of the other fighters, regardless of whether or not they moved one of them up. So if it's like clogging your opponent's back row, the Confusion play is guaranteed, unless they stack on top of this, of course, as their second action. But if there's only one fighter pre-existing on board, they could do something like this, and then it isn't guaranteed. But now that means they can't deploy something else right here unless they want to risk, getting their thing confusioned right away. So persuasioning out a specific hero 1 of your opponents that's really threatening, like Servant here, is a great way to lead into a confusion kill on that fighter. Also, persuasion can be really cool when, let's say, they already have fighters like this on board, and they have something like I believe this is a Nilly. Yeah, let's say something like a Nilly on board here, right? And if you persuasion and you pick Nilly because it's the only thing that can stack on this hero, like the other slots are clogged, so you're going to force it to stack on top of this, thus covering up the Faithful Servant, and now you no longer have to worry about the Faithful Servant until you kill off Nilly. But you'll be pretty happy once you kill off Nilly, and who knows where this thing will be. Like maybe it's over here, and then you kill off Nilly and then easily kill off the Servant immediately after, or shortly after rather. But Yeah, if you can force Persuasion to make them stack on top of a hero that they wouldn't really want to stack onto typically, that can be a really strong use of Persuasion. So these are just a few more of the tricks that you can do with this deck. Now, there are a million tricks that this deck can do, and I'm not going to be able to go over all of them in this video, but hopefully I've highlighted enough of them to at least get you intrigued with the deck, and then go try it out for yourself and play around with it, and you're going to just find other cool plays as time goes on. It's just an incredibly fun deck, and it is very, very powerful. So I highly recommend go try it out for yourselves, and I hope you enjoyed the deck profile.
All right, that's going to do it, guys, for my Malevolent Presence deck profile. I hope you all enjoyed, and go test it out for yourself. See what you think, and I would love to hear about it down in the comments below if you do try it out yourselves, or even if you've played a similar deck that you made on your own. Let me know how that goes, because Malevolent Presence is easily my favorite Hero 3 in the game, at least so far. He just does things that no other deck can, and I just love that. I love being able to kind of mess with your opponent's stacks and whatnot. It's just a super cool way to play the game, in my opinion. And immediately, as soon as I saw that card, Malevolent Presence, I was like, this is like the coolest card in the game. I'm gonna build that guy. So yeah, it was kind of love at first sight. So yeah, let me know how it goes if you try it out for yourselves, and hopefully, I would love to do more Gudnak deck profiles in the future. So if you enjoy these videos, please leave a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel if you're not already. And let me know down in the comments if you do enjoy these, or what other kinds of decks you would like to see shown off from Gudnak, because there's tons of deck building possibilities in this game with just the core set, and there's plenty of expansions on the way, some of which have already been released with the Oroxy and the Rotborn expansions. So I would love to do more deck profiles if you all are enjoying it, so just let me know. And that's going to do it for this one. So you can also consider subscribing to me on Patreon. That helps support me and the channel and just bringing you guys more content, both unmatched and hopefully more Gudnak as well. So consider subscribing. I appreciate all the support from everybody out there. And that's going to do it for this one. So thank you all for watching. I'm ZeroSkater12, and I'll see you next time.